When you look on YouTube for interviews about near death experiences, man, there are just a ton of them out there. What you don't find are interviews about the people closest to those who had near death experiences. That's what today's interview is all about. I'm talking to Nancy Walsch. She is the sister of David Morris, who we interviewed previously. That would be season 2, episode 5, parts 1 and 2. It was such an extraordinary interview that we had to break it into 2 parts. David is one of the wisest, kindest, gentlest, extraordinary human beings that I have met that live on this planet today. It wasn't always like that. He was a profound addict, had a near death experience. That addiction was lifted from him, and he became a rather extraordinary human being. Meanwhile, with him through this whole journey is his sister, Nancy Walsh. What I wanted to find out was what it was like before, during that period where he had his NDE, and afterwards, to be able to witness the change in David and the change in herself because of what happened as a result of this new energy, this love that is being brought forth in him. There are 3 parts to this interview that I want you to pay attention to. The first part is pretty easy. It's kind of the background stuff about how they got to where they were. I think it provides a really nice context. Second is what she calls AGT. And no, it's not America's Got Talent. It's about acceptance, gratitude, and trust. And she explains how she discovered that as a way of being after being around David post NDE. I think it's a rather extraordinary thing. And in the very last part of the interview, she talks about those who are in relationship with NDEers. Um, they need help and understanding. They need a new worldview, and their ability to be here in the present with somebody who's had an NDE takes a different skill set. So she talks about that. Okay, let me give you a little bio on Nancy and we'll get right to it. As I said, she's the sister of David Morris. They grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Nancy worked at Bethlehem Steel for 29 years in a bunch of administrative positions, and toward the last part of her career, she was in HR. Post those 29 years, she and her husband Dick moved to North Carolina, where they retired, living on a lake, just lovely. And then for the last 12 years, they moved up back to Bethlehem so they could be close to Nancy's mother, who was making her transition, and to be closer to family and friends and where their heart is. So we have an extraordinary interview coming up. I hope you really enjoy it. I did. I think it's a really interesting lens to look at near death experiences from those who had to observe it from the outside. It's one of the few, if not the only one, I've ever seen on the internet. So here we go, our interview with Nancy Walsh. Hey, Nancy, thank you for being here on the Afterlife Files. So tell me, how long have you known your brother?
All my life, Scott.
I just thought I'd throw that in as kind of a little fun thing. So, how close were you and your brother growing up?
I would say not very close at all. Really, I'm the only girl amongst 3 brothers.
Oh,
So,
that'll do it.
And he was the baby brother. So I really had my own separate kind of life with cousins and friends that I was closer with.
And as you were growing up, you realized at some point that David was having trouble with drugs and was leading down a path of addiction. When did that happen for you?
I think I moved out of town in 2002 to North Carolina with my husband. And I think in that period is when we both started noticing that things were different with David. He would be losing weight, he would be gaining weight, and my husband was a kind of a person that really could read somebody well as a salesman.
Mm,
And there were some episodes, different things that happened in David's life that were a little indicator. An accident I remember he had um, could have been because he was on the drugs. I'm not positive, but it was a tough time once we realized that he had an addiction. Really, really tough.
and what's that mean? It was a tough time.
It was there was just a lot of heartbreak. There's a loss there. It's something you can't control. Now looking back, I mean, there was nothing we would do and tried to help him, but in the long run, it was just up to him.
Wise words. And so there was a period when you knew that he was taking drugs and it wasn't really, well, it's always bad, but when was there kind of a turn the corner and you realized that, oh dear, this is a full-blown addict and he's not in control?
I think that happened when finally he had to go to a rehab. And he spent a month in the rehab. And I do remember going with my sweet mother and my aunt who lived, they lived together, and David lived there, to his graduation. And that was a happy day because you think, oh, this is going to work. He's going to be clean. Amen.
You're saying that with a tone in your voice that says that it didn't work out that way.
It did not work out that way. David went to my brother Joe's in New Jersey. My brother Joe has a business. He transports racehorses around the country, and he gave David work to do.
Mhm.
And I think David was okay in that space, but shortly thereafter, I think David says about 6 weeks later, he came home for a visit to Bethlehem, and the desire was there, and he went out and he got high again. Unbeknownst to me, because I was living in North Carolina, but he was back in the addiction, back in the addiction.
And so this cycle of taking drugs and not, did we go back into rehab again? How, how'd that work?
He didn't, as far as I remember, the rehab was a once and done, but he was just out of control, just totally out of control. And at that point, I just had to let it go and just walk away and just say, there's nothing I can do. It was a little bit easier because I wasn't in the day to day with him, being that I was living in North Carolina with my husband. So it made it a little bit easier to push it away.
And what was that like having to tell David that you're done, that you weren't going to support him in this lifestyle anymore?
Well, that part of it happened right after David overdosed.
Okay. So start us there. You got the call. When did that happen? Where were you? Tell us about it.
Well, I was living in North Carolina. I was back in Bethlehem visiting for the weekend. I could remember walking in the backyard of my mother's home where David lived. And my aunt came back from the hospital and said David had overdosed. And it was awful. And actually, at that time, unbeknownst to me, David was in the house, in the living room. And there's a lot of things in my life I don't remember, but this, I can just picture this clear as day. I was in the bathroom. I walked out of the bathroom. I saw David in the recliner. And knowing what had just happened, I looked at him and said, David, I'm done. I'll pray for you. Goodbye. And my husband and I were leaving to go back to North Carolina. It was awful. It was just, the doctors didn't know why he survived. It was such a bad overdose, but he did. And I just walked away. I was done. I couldn't deal with it anymore.
Well, we know from David's story that during that near-death experience, um, he was changed. And I imagine that took a while for you to be convinced he was changed. So, how did that process go?
Well, we didn't speak for weeks and weeks. His overdose was in August of 2007. I went back home to North Carolina. And on one afternoon, I think it was a Sunday in October, David called to tell me not that he was sorry, but however long it would take me to heal, it would be okay. And at that point, we both cried together. And as he always says, the healing started, it began.
So, what was it about the new David that was different than the old David?
Well, it took a while because from October till the next spring, we really didn't see a whole lot of each other. But unbeknownst to me, we both had a beautiful Aunt Irene who lived close to David. And after his NDE, he would go down there and they would talk. And she would then at times call me and say, Nancy, he's a different person. He's changed. But I didn't know how, what it was all about. And I was very skeptical. So, I mean, he overdosed, but why would he be changed? I don't know. I didn't know.
So, what were the first signs that this was really true, that your aunt Irene
Mhm.
was telling you the truth?
What were the signs? Well, I kind of remember David coming down to visit me in North Carolina, and he had asked if there were any meetings because he was attending NA meetings at that time. So my husband and I took him to a town 30 minutes away, and we dropped David off for the meeting. We went and did our thing, and we came back to pick him up. And the next morning, David and I were sitting at the table. Well, actually, backing up to the church where he went, as David was walking out to the car, Dick said to me, "You know what? There's just something different about him. I don't know what it is, but there's something different about him." And the next day at breakfast, David and I were talking, and I shared that with him. And that's when it kind of started, noticing he's just not the same guy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a peace and a calmness and a difference in the person, the beautiful person that he is today. It started back then.
So, when did he tell you about his experience as when he overdosed?
I really can't give you a specific time. I did even ask him, when he discovered, that he had this experience. He just told me the story, and the beautiful story, which he also told you in the interview, how he went to a dark place, saw his lifeless body laying there, the addiction was gone. It was gone. And I, at that point, didn't know anything about NDEs at all, his near-death experience. But I said to him, David, I really don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand it, but I believe you. I love you and I believe you. And that started our journey, started my journey to find out, what was this? What happened? What is this all about? Which now gets me really excited because I just love learning about it and I believe it totally.
So, what was your journey about then, about learning about near-death experiences, comparing that to what, happened to David? Did you read books? Did you go to conferences? Hit all the YouTube videos?
No, I didn't. I wasn't a YouTube video person at that time, but I did read some books. And I know at one point, David Googled near-death experiences, and that opened us up to the whole world of IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And
I know they'll appreciate that commercial.
I hope so. It's a fabulous group. So he found a local chapter just in the next town in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. So I started to go with him to the meetings. I was just intrigued. I wanted to know. I always say that I grew up in the Catholic faith, and I always believed there was a heaven and there's a God, and when we die, we're going to go somewhere. We're going to go there if we're good. But I have a whole different belief right now. I know without a shadow of a doubt that when this earthly shell is gone, it's going to be great and glorious. We're going to that happy place.
We are indeed. So, what changed in your belief system between then and now?
I think just growing up in a religion and being fed all that information,
Mhm.
it's different now because I am learning from somebody that I love, that I know experienced something that is so real, so real. I just know in the core of my body that there's so much more beyond what we have here. I know there's a soul in here.
That transformation um, is often referred to as we take what we take beliefs and turn them into knowns.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're presented with a belief structure, but that's different than knowing it deep inside your being.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It is.
I
It
get
is.
that. So how, let's go to David first, and I'm going to come to you. How has David changed since the OD to today? What would describe kind of that progression?
Well, thinking about our relationship before that, we were brother and sister, but not extremely close. There's an age difference there. But after the NDE and after a little bit of time and after learning all about it, I just see and I get emotional because he is just a beautiful, beautiful, loving, kind human being, human spirit that touches people's lives every single minute of every day. He's amazing. I learned so much from him. We're so close. And especially because my husband passed 2.5 years ago. We're there for each other. We just really are. We're best friends.
What a change from before.
From a 25-year drug addict. It's a miracle. Miracles happen.
So, why do you think that miracle happened to David?
Oh, that's a good question. Two, it took away a lot of pain and suffering from those who loved him. And I do recall when he talks about his NDE that he wanted and begged to come back because he did not want our beautiful mother to find her son dead from an overdose. So he wanted to come back. And he's here for a purpose. He's here to spread love, to change people's hearts like he's changed mine.
So, to you, how has that changed for you? But you're a different person than you were before the OD. Who are you now?
I just try to learn from him. I try to be more loving. I always would say one of my hobbies is to be nice and kind to people. I love caring for people. Um, it changed me too, and it's kind of funny because last year at a conference when David and I did speak, I specifically remember being in the hotel room after one of the days, and I liked the show America's Got Talent, as they call it, AGT. And these words popped in my head, and I thought, this is what helps me. This is what helps me and change me. The A stands for acceptance. If we can accept
Nice.
things that happen to us, it makes it so much easier. It makes it so much easier. It helped me, as you know, my husband passed 2.5 years ago, and it helped me so much to get through the loss and as I don't want to say lost because I never lost my husband. I lost his physical body, but I didn't lose his spirit. He passed. But it helped me tremendously because I accepted his death. I accepted his death. So that was the A. The G is gratitude. I have so much gratitude for the wonderful life I had with my husband. I was able to let him go. And the T from the AGT is trust, because I want to trust that going forward, I know that I can trust. Going forward, I will be okay. Kind of funny because I read a little thing where I might have heard it from someone on TV. We plan and we're so excited about the birth of a child, but do we plan for death? Most people don't. They avoid it. They don't want to talk about it. They really don't. But I was fortunate to be with my husband when he passed. He was on hospice in our home for a short couple of days. I never was with anyone who died, but it's a gift. It's such a gift that I was with him. And before the last few breaths that he took, he just looked up to the sky and he said, "Mom." And then he said, Mar, which was his Aunt Margaret, who was like a second mother to him, he said, I'm home.
Oh,
And
my.
his eyes opened up so wide. And I kissed him, and he took 2 breaths, and he passed. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful passing, such a gift. So those are my AGTs: accept, be grateful, and trust going forward.
And I imagine that made quite a difference knowing that Dick is in not an unknown place, but a known place.
And quite honestly, he attended a meeting or two with David and I, and he said to David, you made a believer out of me. So I know he knew where he was going. And I feel him all the time.
Nice. And you know that he exists because you told me a story last night. Would you be willing to tell that about?
Sure, sure. I've had a couple of things happen, and even before the one that you're asking me to tell, um, it was the night before the first year anniversary of his passing.
Yeah.
And I was going to have a celebration the next day with David, myself, and 2 other couples that are closest friends to celebrate Dick's life. He was an amazing person, and it was an amazing marriage. So I went to sleep that night, and at 3:30 in the morning, I was frightened and so startled. I heard something that sounded like 3 or 4 gunshots outside. And I was hurting with fright, and I calmed myself down. It was 3:30 in the morning, and I was able to go back to sleep. And I woke up the next day, and I have a few devotional books that I read in the morning. And I opened my book, and at the bottom of the was May 20th, 2022. On that page, I wrote, at 3:30 in the morning, my precious Dick passed. And I felt like he woke me up at 3:30 in the morning to tell me he was okay, with a bang.
With a bang.
The other story that I told you last night, the one thing that I miss, Dick and I always kissed goodnight every single night. Every single night. We just loved each other tremendously. And I say that that's one thing that I miss, kissing somebody on the lips. So back in February, it was Valentine's Day, and we were in Cozumel on a vacation, and I took a couple of cards to write to people because it's a special day and I want people to feel loved. So I wrote cards out to each of the couples, and I took them downstairs, left them on the table, and to be found the next morning. Lo and behold, I go to sleep. I have the most beautiful dream. Wasn't even thinking about Dick that night. There he was, just holding my face and giving me the most beautiful kiss. It was so real. It was so real. It was just more than a dream. It was really a dream for me. It was so special. So special. So he pops up every now and then.
And I like to think of that, that possibility exists of a relationship with Dick because of how David opened up all our lives to the possibility of what is after and how present we can be in the afterlife. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. To me, I would think the word is being aware. Being aware. So many things happen that we just let slip on by. If you stop and think and sometimes connect the dots, you can put it all together. And just recently, in the days before having this interview, I looked back at my life and how I met my husband, and it was just all divine because I was out on a Tuesday night at a ladies' night at a Holiday Inn. Here comes this gentleman from North Carolina to stay there overnight, popped in the bar for a drink. We had a dance. The next week, the same thing happened. And that's when our relationship started and took off. And like, I feel like God just placed him there for me, for both of us, for both of us. Pretty cool. But I didn't think about that until now, looking back. So
It's kind of a plan in place.
there was a big plan. And Dick would always say, he said, I dreamt about you before I even knew you. So a lot of good stuff going on there.
And so that's quite a plan for somebody to be an addict for 25 years and then to overcome that and then spread a new message of just love abandonedly. Is that a word? I'm not sure.
Abandon love.
There we go. No, not that way.
Not to abandon, but love abandon.
Um, so I get this sense from you, Nancy, that life doesn't have the same kind of fear or anxiousness that it might have had before you underwent these changes that Dave helped to precipitate. There we go. Am I right on that?
He's helped me to become a different person. Certainly more confident, something I was lacking in the past. To be myself. Sometimes we criticize ourselves, the little things we don't like about ourselves. And I'll always be encouraged and just be who you are. And yeah.
I have a friend who says, when we get older, we get more. So we become more of who we were and we let go of the presumptions of culture, that kind of the restrictions. And I think that's one of the messages that David has for us is just love. And I don't care how you respond to that, but it's my job just to be in that loving space. And I see you're adopting that too.
Took a while.
So is there anything you'd like to end this on? Any last words for our folks out there who have been listening so patiently?
Well, I think if you're either a sibling of someone who's had an NDE or a spouse, I recall someone saying to me, well, what if your spouse has an NDE and they come back and they're not the same person? And I want that same person back, but they're totally transformed. As we know, that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I would say to that person struggling, as I did, I don't understand you, but I believe you, and try to educate yourself. There's so many books out there. There's so many things on YouTube, so many beautiful stories from beautiful people that have had their NDEs. I've listened to so many and I try to share them with people. Give that person time to understand themselves what they went through, and give yourself time to learn and hopefully grow and rebuild, if you have to, your relationship. I was blessed. Mine turned out to be glorious with my beautiful brother.
I think that's a lovely spot to end this on. My beautiful brother, David Morris, Nancy Walsh, thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching, stick around because we've got an extra deep dive today that I think you're going to really like. So, see you on the flip side. Nancy, high five. Well done.
Love you, Scott.
Love you, dear. Yay. Wasn't that perspective? Didn't it just open up your eyes in terms of what is possible and how near death experiences affects not only the individual but the family and how it can affect our community as a whole? The part that I found really fascinating for me was how she was able to turn beliefs into knowns. This idea that there is an afterlife. She learned it from the Catholic Church. Of course, that must be true, but now she knows it to be real. And on top of that, she has some experience with it. There was that story about how her husband woke her up exactly a year after his passing. And then that beautiful um, description of how he came to her in a lucid dream, held her face, and kissed her on the lips. That signature moment between the two of them, because it was so important to Nancy to have validation that the afterlife is just this close, that every bit of it means that that we can have contact with it, and that people exist there in a way that can help us live our lives, not only answer questions and to let us know, but to deliver that tenderness, that love that comes in an intimate relationship like a marriage. I found that to be really touching about how she had made this transition all because she had a brother who has underwent an NDE, and how he was able to um, incite her curiosity so that she found out more about it, went with him to meetings, went to the IONS conferences, and began to live from the new perspective that he brought her. It's extraordinary. Thank you for being with us here at the Afterlife Files. We really appreciate it. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye now.